Okay, welcome back, everyone. Tom Lewis, our next speaker, is a civil engineer and doctor of jurisprudence. He is an international authority in climate adaptation and mitigation, as well as sustainability and resilience. Tom is the president of TidalBasin Group and works with federal, state, and local governments on infrastructure engineering, emergency and disaster management, environmental services, and renewable energy. Tom showed up in the 2023 CAC Florida Climate Conference, the triple threat of water and what to do about it. He left after writing a check for $5,000 to join the CAC as a Cat 5 member and is now a valued member of the board of the CAC. He says, Bob extracts a high price, but for a good cause. Tom will talk about infrastructure investments, schools, roads, bridges, and Bob's favorite topic, traffic circles, and how to lower risks through prudent investments. Tom, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And one slight correction. I didn't write the check for $5,000. My boss, my wife, lovely Christina, she wrote the check after I convinced her to write the check. But actually, she's a proud member as well. So Christina and I are both Category 5 members. And yeah, coming along the way, became so impressed with what was going on. In addition to making that donation, started talking to Bob about how I could help beyond just that financial support. And it eventually led to conversations. And now I'm a proud new board member as well of the CAC and very proud about that. And also having recently moved here to Sarasota with my wife as our primary residence. We also have a place up in New Jersey, really wanting to get involved locally because really climate adaptation is really all about the local action. You can do some things regionally and nationally, as Bob alluded to earlier, but where the rubber really meets the road is locally when it comes to climate adaptation and resilience. So Bob asked me as the final speaker for today, before the big reveal of the forecast, to talk about infrastructure transitions, as Elizabeth noted. So just flip forward, I guess, or is that the wrong way? Or do I have to go forward? Oh, here we go. All right, so Elizabeth talked about what the title is, but maybe to simplify it, it's really all about, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? That's an old saying that applies to a lot of things, and it definitely applies to infrastructure and to climate adaptation and resilience. So I just want to talk to you a little bit more about that and with some practical local examples and situations. But we could have the same discussion about many other cities and areas in Florida and many other places nationally and internationally. Let's go through here. These are just the topics I'll go through, but in the interest of time, I'll go quick. So in addition to being the president and COO of TidalBasin, which if you think about the ounce of prevention and worth a pound of cure analogy, TidalBasin focuses historically on the pound of cure, meaning when a disaster hits, there's money available, whether it be from the insurance industry, the private sector, or it be from the federal, state, or local governments, all of the above, actually. We help people impacted by disasters to recover, to respond, recover, and then hopefully also mitigate for when the same thing might happen to them in the future. That's what FEMA calls hazard mitigation. The idea of climate adaptation and resilience is even more proactive than that, which is to get ahead. You don't need to have a storm hit you to think this way. You should start thinking in a resilient mindset ahead of a storm hitting you, and it will benefit you, I assure you, if you do. And the book, I also have a book, which is, there's a few copies here, and I'd be happy to give a copy to anybody who's willing to sign up to becoming a member of CAC today. And if there's others left over at the end, I can give the rest away because I certainly don't want to take them home with me. But definitely first rights to anybody who's willing to commit to being a CAC member today at any category level, 1 through 5. And that goes for the people online as well. That offer, I can get the book to you for anyone else online who would like to sign up as a member today. Go to the next slide. So why is infrastructure transition needed? Elizabeth talked about how I met CAC last year, and the triple threat was kind of the theme of the conference a little over a year ago. It's February of last year when I first became aware of what CAC is doing here. And, the rising sea levels, the slowing of the jet stream, was referenced a little bit earlier. Rising sea levels was talked about a lot. I don't need to go in that any further, but there's also this thing called the moon wobble, which Bob talked about last year at the conference, where if you think about the moon's orbit around the Earth, the orbit itself rotates slowly. So every 19 years or so, it lines up in a way with the Earth and the sun that actually exacerbates moon-influenced tides. So that on top of sea level rise, on top of the slowing jet stream with the warming waters that are created and the change in the paths of storms that's created by that, you've got this moon wobble that will cause a temporary exacerbation of flooding along the coasts in the 2030s. It could be in the several inches. And then you've also got the rapid intensification that was discussed by both Rick and Bob as a major factor that's getting worse and worse. It's also cloudbursts. I mean, Bob and Rick talked about how you don't have to be at the coast, right? There's just more and more intense storms, and they sometimes don't have anything to do with a storm, a named storm, or even the potential for a named storm. My wife and I split our time between the New York City area in New Jersey and here in Sarasota. And in New York, they had just a regular old storm, summer storm, that what they now refer to as a cloudburst up there. And it was some of the worst flooding in the boroughs of New York City that had ever happened. And several deaths actually occurred. So talk about no warning, right? This is the issue, and we have to be more prepared because you don't always have the luxury of warning. And cloudbursts can happen literally anywhere, including Death Valley, as Bob mentioned. Another thing that we, especially in urban areas, growing urban areas like Sarasota, that we haven't talked much about today, but also need to be thinking about, adapt to, and be more resilient, is urban heat island effects, right? So in addition to the climate warming, the waters warming, which in a coastal urban environment means you're going to have more and more warm days, you also get the development, tall buildings in close proximity to each other, kind of blocking some of the free flow of air. Also more surface area, often darker colors, more pavement that absorbs the sun's heat and actually can store that heat for days at a time. And when that lines up with warmer weather, you get these urban heat island effects. And we're looking at major increases in the number of days, above 95 degrees. We'll go from what used to be 10 days per year here to north of 60 days per year. And then when you look at all the triple threat plus the other flooding effects, the estimates are for a place like Sarasota, that we could be looking at 70 days or more of flooding from coastal storms, cloudbursts, and even the sunny day effects of tidal surges associated with the moon, which will then be further exacerbated by the moon wobble effect that we talked about. So that's the first reason why we should be transitioning our infrastructure, just because of the increased threat from all of this cumulative list of factors that I just went through. And just to put a number on it, how serious this is, the number of homes that were damaged by Hurricane Ian, 5,000, and then there was another 30,000 severely damaged by Hurricane Ian. That's why Hurricane Ian is the worst storm to ever hit Florida. There may have been others that were pretty bad too, but nothing even close to the number of homes and the financial impact that the storm had because it hit close to a very densely populated area, but by no means the most densely populated areas it could hit, like Tampa, the Sarasota to Tampa area, the Miami up through, Bradenton, up through the Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale area, Miami-Dade County. If a storm like that hits in those places, these numbers would go up substantially. So the other reason why infrastructure transition is needed is because of other vulnerabilities, not all related to climate, but definitely impacted and made worse by climate events and extreme weather events. Homelessness is a big problem in the country. Certainly, we're not immune to it here in Sarasota. So there's more people who aren't sheltered even on a normal day. And how do you protect them? How do you warn them? How do you educate them? Huge issue. There's more people moving to Florida, not just the wealthy, not just the retired people who are more blessed financially, but working families that have to serve these growing communities and these growing economies. They bring with them, lower income, less ability to absorb the storms, less places they can go, may not even have a car, and a lot of single people coming here as well. Again, less likely to have a place to go if they're new to the area. And yes, more and more elderly, disabled who aren't easily evacuated, some who are less mobile, huge issue and an ever increasing challenge here. And then just overpopulation, overdevelopment in flood prone zones. So that was something that was brought up in one of the questions earlier. Absolutely a challenge that, municipalities, counties that are growing like that do need to balance. Yes, you want to be open for business. You want to be more and more economically strong, but you also want to do it in a smart way. And there are smart ways to do it. And then this was also alluded to before, Rick, I think, mentioned it. People just either not getting the message or ignoring the message about warnings. So when you do have the luxury of some advanced warning in some of these storms, especially the bigger hurricanes, you'd be surprised how many people actually don't heed the warnings. There's a small percentage of people who literally understand it, but say anyway, very small. Actually, most of the people who get caught and don't leave, it's either because they just can't, they don't know where to go. They may not have a support system or family nearby, don't have a car. Those are the people that really the education, the awareness, the preparedness, and having a community approach to this, communication, which we'll talk a little bit about later, is huge. We also have a lot of aging infrastructure, and that could be roads and bridges and stormwater management system, but also could be, the Van Wezel was mentioned and Bob being on the Purple Ribbon Committee. It's a great example. It was built, beautiful spot. You see it in the picture there, literally right on the water, 5 feet above mean sea level, at the orchestra pit level. It's very vulnerable, not just because of its age, but because of where it was built and the elevation at which it was built. And that by no means is the only example of a structure like that here in Sarasota and many other coastal cities around the country and around the world. And then the local streets are often at lower elevations too. The stormwater systems are undersized for how things have been built up around them. And there's just not enough local sheltering options. Yes, somebody mentioned the hotels. Totally agree. Get hotels to be more kind of tied to the sheltering strategy and not do price gouging. That's a great strategy, a great suggestion. But even if all the hotels did that, you still need more. So there are other ways that we can think about sheltering, maybe 5-10 miles in from the coast. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And the fact that there's not enough schools and parks and open space areas as areas like this grow is also both a challenge and an opportunity, because as you're building these new things, you can actually think about resilience and climate adaptation, do the designs and the planning in a more smart way. And in fact, that's what the book is all about. It's about climate resilience and sustainability, and it's chock full of specific project examples on how you can do that. And I'll talk about a few here for the rest of the presentation. just to put a finer point, on the homeless situation after a storm, so the 10,000 is the rough estimate of how many people were left homeless after Hurricane Ian. And again, could have been much worse, could have hit a much more densely populated area. So that number would also go up by multiples if a storm like Ian hit a more densely populated area, such as Sarasota, Bradenton, Tampa, St. Pete area. So if that weren't all enough, there's all kinds of other challenges and considerations, which is why this is so complex and why you do need professionals to help you as a community sort through these kind of things. There are political and institutional challenges in communities to change. Just people in general don't like to change, but especially political forces don't accommodate change quickly. And that's not a red or a blue thing. That's in both cases. Change is difficult for politicians who especially are on short terms, right? They're only elected for a few years at a time. Are they really going to think long term about resilience and climate adaptation, that really the benefits of it will accrue after they're probably done in office? That's a big challenge. The uncertainty in future projections. Yes, there's lots of, whether you call it denialism or even just skepticism of climate change and the weather predictions, things that we've talked about with real science and real data here today. Yes, you can always talk about, well, what are the uncertainties? How do you really know? And there is uncertainty in climate and weather. No one can deny that. The limited resources, all communities to varying degrees, especially the smaller you get or the less high on the economic scale you get in a community, the less resources you have. And even the more affluent communities, there's not enough resources to go around. And so you have to make prioritization type decisions. Equity and social justice, making sure that all residents are thought about, even the homeless, as I alluded to, not just the more powerful, the more wealthy, who actually tend to be the people who can probably protect themselves more readily. Think about everybody in that whole spectrum when you're thinking about climate adaptation and resilience. And all these things are interconnected, which again makes it really, really complicated and challenging, but there are many solutions. There's many great examples that other communities have done that you can draw upon, not just in the US, but worldwide. And I'm privileged to travel a lot and speak at a lot of events nationally and internationally. And so, yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You're not alone in this by a long stretch. So take advantage of lessons learned elsewhere. And then the insufficient public awareness and engagement. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That's where CAC is just so great and why I was so inspired by it a little over a year ago to join and then become a board member. It's critical, that we educate people, not just in general about the risks or scare. It's not about scaring people. It's about empowering people, making you feel more in control, to make the right decisions at the right time. And that's why it's such a great organization. Definitely hope you all agree and will continue to participate and support the organization going forward. So there are many ideas we could talk about, but this is one, Bob kind of teed up for me a little bit when he made the comment about, oh, well, we need more sheltering, but not right at the impact zone, a little further inland. Okay, great point, Bob. Great idea. But back to the interconnectedness theme, right? Everything's interconnected. Well, it's a growing community. This community needs more and more schools. Okay, well, if you're going to build more and more schools, even those schools that aren't in the impact zone, right near the coast, for example, or near an inland waterway, build all the schools with the idea of that they will be resilient to wind. The picture up there is of a domed school. FEMA actually has a program where you can get money to build schools like this. The extra cost it takes to make it more structurally resilient, to make it more resilient from a power standpoint. You see pictures of different technologies that I've worked with that can be deployed by communities and are actually mobile, that could make sure there's power if the grid goes out. So you have these things available. And put all these things together and have equipment like you see in the bottom picture there, so that you can convert a school very quickly if it's designed with that in mind to become a shelter, a community shelter. And this is being done in other communities. I haven't seen it as much yet here to any large degree, but why shouldn't it be as we continue to grow here and continue to build? Doesn't have to be schools, but schools is a great example. It could be other community facilities that can also similarly be built with sheltering in mind. Yeah, I mentioned, housing solutions, for homeless. And it's really not homeless in the everyday homelessness sense. Yes, it includes them, but homeless in the sense of you've become homeless because your home has been destroyed or damaged to the point where you can't live there anymore. This is a huge issue. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and in big years, billions and billions of dollars get spent by the federal government, mostly through FEMA, but also a little bit through HUD, and HUD takes over for the long term. But FEMA, for the short and midterm, spends lots of money on these programs, and communities knowing where that money is, how to leverage it, who they have to be talking to get ready so that everything's in place so you can access these funds. Again, this is what, and we're by no means the only company that does this, but this is what TidalBasin does for our clients, gets them prepared so they're ready and they know where the pots of money are so they can leverage them, because there is a lot of money out there, more and more every year actually available, and not just from the federal government, even from nonprofits and other source, private sector even getting involved through their corporate social responsibility programs, et cetera. So, other thoughts about, temporary sheltering, considerations and examples of solutions. In the upper left, a company called MLU that we've partnered with here at TidalBasin. They're not, again, the only one, but just as a great example, they specialize. They have thousands of trailers in inland Georgia ready to be deployed to places like Florida. They also have modular housing that's very quick to set up. The trailers usually try to use if you need sheltering for months. The modular housing is better for the really big storms where people are going to be homeless for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And so again, knowing which of those solutions is right for you ahead of the storm so that when the storm hits and you assess how bad it is, you can quickly ask for the right types of solutions. Those are conventional solutions, readily used historically in this country through FEMA mostly. And then, the picture below that is actually from Germany, where the airport in Berlin was converted. Again, if you have the equipment and you know where there are open spaces that can be used, you can quickly set up shelters just about anywhere in a big available structure. But you've got to have this stuff ready and staged, or you have to have private sources under contract who will do it for you. And both ways work. If you can afford to have your own materials stockpiled, great. But if not, just knowing who are the private companies that do these kind of services and do it fast. People who sleep with their cell phone next to their head and answer if you call them at Saturday at 2 a.m. and asking for a solution. Other climate resilient, climate adaptation ideas. Talk a lot about the community and housing infrastructure, but what I didn't talk about yet, but was mentioned earlier, was the evacuation. Great question that was brought up. Super important. And it's tough. Evacuation of densely populated, very tough, but all the time we're learning to be better. And it's not a one and done. If you have an evacuation plan that's several years old, then it's outdated. So it needs to be constantly updated, especially as your infrastructure changes. All the rotaries that were built, Elizabeth joked about the rotaries. Yeah, rotaries help actually. Flow of traffic actually is more efficient, but what if the traffic lights aren't working that are leading up to those rotaries, other things? You need to be ready to keep that free flow of traffic to the extent you can. And there are planners, there are engineers who specialize in this that we work with, and a few we have on our own staff, but they're everywhere. Use them. constantly update, constantly revisit as your infrastructure changes. It's absolutely critical. Your social infrastructure too. That was mentioned as well by Guillermo. That's super important. The nonprofits, mobilizing the nonprofits, the Red Cross, the one we all know, but there are so many others. That needs to be part of your planning and your toolbox, basically. Talked about the heat island effect. Greener cities are not just environmentally higher performing, which they definitely are. They can save you on your energy bills. They actually have been proven over the life cycle of a piece of infrastructure, to save money. They may cost a little bit more sometimes, like putting a green roof on top of a building may cost more than just a regular old roof, but absolutely pays for itself over its lifespan. And if you can't do the green roof, at least make sure your roof is painted white. Simple things, right? But that doesn't change the cost one bit. Just making sure that you put a different color on top of your roof so it reflects the heat instead of absorbs it and then radiates it for multiple days during hot weather spells. And then limiting the tall buildings, or if you're not going to limit them, at least making sure there's spacing between them and thinking about the flow, the way the winds, the onshore breezes go, and don't set them up in a way that become a wind block, which will just magnify the urban heat island effect. And you'd be surprised how much a difference it will make when you space the buildings out versus having them all right next to each other. But this takes planning. This takes commitment from the community, including the developers, to do the right thing and do it more smartly. And then really important, integrating nature-based solutions. A green roof, like I talked about, is one example of it, but more integrating it into your flood protections, not just building big flood barriers. The Netherlands, of course, famous for the big dikes. They have to be. They're literally below sea level. So I'm not looking down on them, but we're not below sea level here. We don't have to build big barriers that are going to disconnect people from the enjoyment of the environment. You can actually build barriers with mangroves and dunes and other vegetative measures, that enhance the connectivity to the environment and the use and enjoyment in good times, but also protect you more when those big storms come. And I mentioned that I have the privilege of speaking often. Just 2 days ago, I was on a panel that was put on by Duke University with the woman who actually was the lead author on the new rules that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have out for comment right now. And there's a few weeks left in the comment period. If anybody's interested, I can connect you to that so you can look at it and maybe make some comments. But I was on that panel with her and a former U.S. Army Corps scientist and also a nonprofit leader from the Nature Conservancy. And similarly today, talked about how you have to integrate all these things. And the good news is these new rules actually compel the government to include nature-based alternatives when they think about options for flood protection and water resource investments by the federal government. And even for structural solutions, if there's no other way to do it other than building a barrier or wall in an engineered fashion, even there, okay, at least try to incorporate some nature-based elements into the structural solution. It's a real leap forward. Let's hope that the rule gets put forth and actually used in the very near future. But these are all great momentum examples. And also resources, educational resources, places like the Army Corps of Engineers, the Nature Conservancy, et cetera. So a few local examples here, maybe a little hard to see, but I'll just explain. So the upper left, is the Bay Estuary Program example, Lido, the North Lido Beach area, okay. Taking advantage of that unbelievable natural resource, but doing it in a way that also increases biodiversity, increases the use and enjoyment, but yes, also increases storm resilience at the same time. Why wouldn't you do all those things together rather than think of them as separate things? The one on the top right, is a project, the Hudson Bayou Restoration Program that was built a few years ago, won some awards. It's one part of the Hudson Bayou, and it incorporated natural features into the stormwater management to protect not just from the surge coming in, but as the question was asked, what about when the water goes out? It can be equally violent, especially in a cloudburst situation. So you want to think about it in both directions, which this project did, and is a very good example of that. And the other part of the Hudson Bayou, which is actually the neighborhood I live in, Laurel Park, that hasn't been addressed yet. So the lower table is an example of the city of Sarasota, with its own money from the penny tax, is thinking about, okay, what can we do on resilience projects? So 2 out of the 3 projects in that screenshot that I took are resilience projects. And the one that's highlighted is the one in my neighborhood that the CAC is already engaged in. I'll be engaged in working with the city hand in hand. They've agreed to let the Laurel Park Neighborhood Association actually be a leader before the project even gets started, before the planning even starts, taking input, because that's when it's most powerful, right? Input from the community members, input from the other environmental community, nonprofits. Great example of really harnessing the social infrastructure as part of the planning, design, and implementation of a climate adaptation and resilience project. So last but not least, I've mentioned it several times already, community education and involvement, very important. I've seen so many projects as an engineer over my 30+ year career sometimes get actually brought to a complete halt, but more often delayed many years because the government will want to bake the solution and make it in their mind as ironclad as they can, and then show it to the community and say, look how great a job we did. And then invariably somebody or several somebodies from the community say, well, did you think about this? Or did you think about that? And they're like, well, I guess we didn't. So now they have to go back to the drawing board or address that, because most regulations and federal funding requires that you respond to community comment. So why not make community involvement just part of the whole situation from the start of a project, when you're funding it, you're planning it, not just at the end after you've designed it and you want to get a check in the box for saying you did some community engagement meetings. And there are lots of resources for this here in Florida. FDM just signed a memorandum of agreement with Heather Hackett's here from Local Relief. She's in the front row here. People are interested. That's the image in the upper left corner. So this is a mobile app, right? That's been developed and can be leveraged by governments, by all the different community groups, NGOs, the nonprofits, and even just citizens to educate themselves, to get information on a real-time basis when a disaster does strike. Where do you get water? Where can you get other resources? Where are shelters available? Right in your hand, in your smartphone. Many other examples of great organizations like Local Relief that are here and available. In this case, it is based right here in Sarasota, but is deploying nationally very shortly. Heather will be launching this nationally, and TidalBasin is proud to say we're partnering with Local Relief. And it's a really important part, again, of the toolbox of solutions that you need, to really make such a beautiful community. That picture, unbelievable, of Sarasota coming off the bridge. But yeah, it's part of the reason it's so beautiful is because it's right on the water. Makes it very vulnerable, but that doesn't mean you throw up your hand and say, well, it's just going to be what it is. No, there are smart things you can do to make it less vulnerable. And even if you can't avoid, the impacts of a major storm, if we get a Category 5, you're not going to avoid impact. But part of resilience is not just about avoiding all impacts. It's about being able to respond faster. Be homeless a shorter period of time. Have roads shut down a shorter period of time. That's a big part of it, of risk mitigation. And again, there's money available from the federal government, from the state. Florida actually has I think $1 billion in their resilience fund available. Communities, like the penny tax example I talked about, City of Sarasota, there's money. Let's talk about how we best spend that money and do it right, do it smart, do it in an interconnected way. Now you're adapting to the realities of climate change and being more resilient to extreme weather. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom, so much. We love living in our great city of Sarasota, and you protect what you love, right? And that's what we're doing. I was just so glad to see your multi-pronged approach to protecting our infrastructure and our way of life here. And I was just so glad to that you emphasize the nature-based solutions. And I also loved hearing about the mobile app that's going to be available to us. So that's really terrific. I think you addressed already what I'm going to ask you, but if there's anything else that you'd like to say, Tom, what is the single most important infrastructure idea that you can offer to mitigate our risks through planning rather than reacting after a storm event?
Yeah, I mean, inherent in your question is the answer, which is it has to be mindful of the entire life cycle of infrastructure. I mean, everybody likes to think about even the planning, design, construction. By the time you even get to the planning stage, you've already made some decisions, usually during the funding stage and during kind of the political debate stage, the way communities and governments work. So even better than getting involved as communities in the planning stage, getting involved even earlier, at the funding stage and the political stage, right? Having meetings, inviting your local commissioners to appear at Lakewood Ranch, and having a direct dialogue with them, so that when they're thinking about the funding conversations that occur as they're doing their job as a commissioner, that's in their head, right? Your words, your questions, your concerns are in their head. And then on the other end of the life cycle, again, people think planning, design, construction, long-term operations and maintenance. Even the best piece of infrastructure requires operations, maybe even nature-based solutions require long-term operations and maintenance. Don't forget about that, because if you build something great, a great solution, but then you don't maintain it, you don't have resources available to help it do what it was meant to do for many decades, it will go into disrepair, and it may still function to some level, but it won't function at its highest and best level. So think life cycle. Yes, planning, design, construction phase, but also funding stage and long-term. This is our community. You own these assets. Infrastructure is yours. They call it public infrastructure, right? Putting aside private buildings. Yeah, it's yours. So care about it through its entire life cycle.
And that's what we're doing today. We're planting the seeds. And are there any other questions here from the audience? Lori.
Thank you, Tom. The question is, how do you measure damages that don't happen because of government and private investment?
That's a great question, Lori, because the question was asked earlier about skepticism on climate data and things like that. Arming yourself with data is a way to educate people and hopefully can change some minds, out there. So similar case here, your question is a great one, because a lot of times people will say, including politicians, oh, but Tom, doing it in a more resilient way will increase the cost to the taxpayers by $1 million or $100,000, right? So we can't do it. Great idea, Tom, but we can't do it because we've got to care about the taxpayers. We've got to manage, smartly, fiscally responsible. We want to go with the lowest capital cost solution that at least does the minimum job, right? Okay, you can do that, and many governments do. But actually, the performance of that piece of infrastructure, if you build it with that philosophy, when the big one comes, will cost you more money manyfold, to your point. It's a fact, and there's data out there that proves it. And so FEMA has been doing what they call hazard mitigation for 3 decades now. Resilience is now the term of art that you hear a lot more than hazard mitigation. But given that FEMA has many decades of this, they've tracked what they spend their hazard mitigation dollars on. What that means is when a disaster hits a community, some percentage of the federal money that FEMA gets to help a community respond and recover, you have to spend on hazard mitigation projects, which are designed to make the community more resilient if a similar storm were to come again sometime in the future. It's a small percentage, 4 or 5% of the federal funding. So, but it can be substantial in the bigger dollars in the bigger storms in terms of total dollars. But the point here to your question, Lori, is they track that. They have tracked, okay, when we've spent money on hazard mitigation for 30 plus years, and then a storm hits that same community, go back to those projects that were built with hazard mitigation dollars and see how they fared. And basically, again, this is data. This is not my opinion. You go there and you look, and It varies depending on the piece of infrastructure and the situation, but somewhere between 4 and 10 times return on investment, meaning for every dollar that FEMA spent on hazard mitigation, it pays itself 4 to 10 times the next time a similar event occurs in that same community. Whereas it's 0 or maybe even negative if you took the other philosophy of minimum capital cost, and then that piece of infrastructure gets wiped out because you put back what was there before. Well, what was there before was vulnerable, even before climate change. Why are you going to just put back what was there before because you're trying to save a few dollars on capital costs? Spend that little extra, and it is absolutely a smart investment. So great question. Thank you.